Today we are talking about Memphis. The lecture is premiered. I talked a lot about Gupta in my history and Egyptology, about his talent to create art and crafts. But today's story is different, and today, as far as I can, I will try to tell you the story of the city, its ruins, its fragments, and I really want at some point the ruins to become temples. Fragments gain their former integrity, and between the columns and statues again appeared people, ancient Egyptians with their tears, thoughts, desires and stories. For we are talking about one of the most amazing cities in the history of the existence of ancient Egyptian civilization, and I hope I can prove it to you today. Traditionally, I ask you first to transfer your mobile phones to flight mode so that nothing interferes with us. And we will now start our conversation. I will sail to the north along the river waters like the Lord who has his own. I will decorate my shoulder with a reed wreath, for I am striving for Memphis. I will say to the bird, the Lord of Maat, give me my beloved today. The river is like wine, the god of the bird is her reed, the nymph of the water leaf is the goddess Sekhmet, the bud is her adet, Nefertun is a fragrant flower, the earth is illuminated by her beauty, like a cup with mandragora, Memphis is placed before the beautiful. A fragment of a favourite text from the Papyrus Harris 500, which is kept in the British Museum. This is not just a story about the river and the gods that inspire its beginning. This is part of a whole genre of Egyptian literature, which was called a longing for Memphis. For the city was so perfect, so beautiful, so unusual, that in a poetic form, to return to the homeland, to swim along the river, to find the long-awaited love, and to reach the desired, all this was part of the image of a legendary city in which each of the Egyptians dreamed once to strive, in which each of the Egyptians once dreamed to visit. The history of this city, probably as best as possible, conveys the whole history of the ancient Egyptian civilization. Because, according to the preserved chronicles, the first buildings here were created still under the legendary King Menes, the founder of the Egyptian state. That is, we are talking about the turn of the 31st and 30th centuries BC. And then Memphis went through the entire history of the pharaoh state, up to the Greek-Roman times, and only after the conquest of Alexander the Great, Memphis began to lose its political fame, because he had a competitor, Alexandria, and when the political will, together with the house of Ptolemy, the heir to Alexander the Great, went north to the coast of the Mediterranean, only then did Memphis finally become grey, the city of that grey antiquity, which ascended to the frontier of the beginning of the Egyptian statehood. The sad thing is that I will give you a lot of text today, and I will also show you a lot of amazing monuments. The point is that today a tourist usually comes to Necropolis, and when we talk about Giza, Saqqara, some other legends, absolute legends of Egyptian archaeology, that this is the Memphis necropolis. A tourist asks, where is Memphis? And then his car comes to a small village, which is called Mitrahina. There lies in the centre of the museum, in the open air, a huge limestone pyramid. And then it is shown to him on the fields and on the ground, built with modern villages. And yet, in the 13th century, the famous Arab chronicler Abdel Latif al-Baghdadi wrote about the ruins of Memphis for half a day, walking on foot in all directions. This is the story of those great cities, which turned out to be the place where the new capitals will arise later. Therefore, at first, Alexandria Memphis, as I said, became such a grey-haired old man of antiquity. Then gradually, in the 7th century of the new era, Along with the arrival of the Arabs, Al-Masr al-Kahira arose, the great conqueror of Cairo, and Memphis became a limestone city. And many of its monuments, fragments, inscriptions on stone blocks can be found today in old Cairo during the journey through the mosques, because the fragments of this ancient city became the basis and foundation of the new culture. And yet, speaking of this city, I will hardly say today any detailed words about its necropolis, because we often talk about Dizi, Sakari, Barwashi, Zawiyat al-Aryani, Absiria, Dashuria, Meidumia. This is all the Memphis necropolis. It is located 30 kilometres north to south, and there are, among other things, the great pyramids of Dizi. The pyramids of Khafur are now in front of you. And all this was the city of the dead, or for the ancient Egyptians, the city of the eternally alive, next to the capital, which has never been fully excavated. But still, it seems to me that the history of the preserved monuments, including those that were taken out of Memphis to the cities of Europe and America, will allow us today to imagine what a great city was like. The study of Memphis began in the 19th century. The great German archaeologist and researcher, one of the founders of Egyptology, Karl Richard Lepsius, together with his expedition, became interested in the suburbs of Cairo, approximately 27 kilometres south of Cairo on the western bank of the Nile. There was a suburb, such a small village, which by the way is still called Elbe Dreshein, and there he saw the ruins of a giant past. In fact, the maps of Lepsius became the first plan, according to which later archaeologists began to be interested in this place. Further like this, on this swampy soil, there was a famous hydrologist, an Ottoman scholar, Joseph Hekeken Bey. He was, of course, of Armenian origin, and Hekeken begins to find here, in the process of research, huge, colossal statues. These colossal statues attracted French and Englishmen here. First of all, Englishmen. And if at first the English presence in Memphis is a traditional export of monuments to the British Museum, as one of my Egyptian colleagues once said, only very heavy monuments were not exported to the British Museum simply because of their weight. And this story will have a real confirmation here in Memphis. Then the British archaeological mind came here. This is a frame from 1906. The great father of archaeology, William Matthew Flinders of Petre, begins the study of the city. And there, literally from clay and silt, not only statues but also fragments of the walls of a grandiose city which had a total area in the period of its development about 60 hectares. This is a huge territory. And in the 13th to 12th centuries BC, in the period of its development, we are very close to the Egyptian population because the census has not been preserved, up to 30,000 people. This is a lot for the cities of antiquity. And in principle, Memphis in antiquity was not only a legend but really one of the largest cities. And this city stood at the junction of the valley and the delta in the busiest and busiest trading place. That is why in ancient times it became such a metropolis where not only the Egyptians lived but also all those peoples with whom Egypt interacted. If we talk about Syria and Phoenicia, Palestine, or the Hittite kingdom, that is, all the emissaries of the Egyptian kings, they found here an opportunity to meet with representatives of other peoples who here, as we will learn from the Egyptian texts, also found a rather hospitable reception which was unexpected for Egypt, which, as you know, was a mono-national culture. The very first findings showed an absolutely incredible scale. This Sphinx of the king of Menhotep II, the 15th century BC, is the second largest sphinx in Egypt, after the one in Giza. Unique shots of the Chronicle, 1908. This is the beginning of the interest of Egyptologists, scientists, researchers, travellers to this amazing city, and the beginning of science as such. The first materials that were associated with this city, I do not accidentally show this shot. Pay attention to it. You will have something to compare it with. This is all the pre-platinum era. In 1902, the first Aswan Dam was built. Britannica, because of which the temples of Upper Nubia for 6 to 8 months a year were covered with water. In the 1960s, it raised its huge, massive Sadalal, the high-altitude Aswan Dam. As a result, the groundwater rose to a height of more than 4 meters. And what we see here now, like such dry ruins, this is a fragment of the eastern entrance to the hypostyle of the Ptah temple. Today it's all a lake. And then the locals joked that the archaeology of Memphis is the story of Coma and Burka. Qom in Arabic is a hill, and many names will always start in Memphis archaeology with this word Komalazia, Komal Kala, and so on. That is some heights, and Birka or Burket is a swampy low lake, and where the largest archaeological monuments of the city were located due to the fact that they were in the depths of the cultural layers. There were literally swamps and lakes, archaeological works of which were very difficult. And so today, when about 20 foreign missions work in Memphis, the main problem is not only that most of the city has modern settlements, modern villages, but also that the highest level of groundwater is dying what was perfectly preserved in this land from the 15th and 13th centuries BC, and today there is enough evidence of this story. Actually, one of them, this is the same place that you saw in the frame at the beginning of the 20th century. The fence at least somehow protects the archaeological zone from the modern village of Mitrahin. And here between these columns, this is the hypostyle of Pope Francis II. I will show you the reconstruction later. Here are the herons, here the fish swim. Here is such an incredible swamp. And in the case when very brave archaeologists take up the concession to work in Memphis, they are waiting for colossal work, huge sums of money, in order to simply first dry this land and only then talk about these monuments, the study of which is supposed to be here. Nevertheless, even such destructions, and these are all traces of the construction of Cairo, as you understand, when Memphis was a quarry, still in the local tradition, Memphis remained part of such an amazing Arab legend. Well, for example, I think everyone remembers the biblical legend about the beautiful Joseph and the wife of Potiphar, who was seduced by his beauty. In the Arab tradition, in Islam, in the Quran, Potiphar bears the name of Aziz, and one of the large hills under which the royal palace was located, it is called Kum al-Aziziyah, that is the hill of this Aziz. And the central part of this temple in Memphis was called Kud Zuleika, the palace of Zuleika, that very Zuleika, so the Quran called the wife of Potiphar, who was seduced by the beauty of Joseph. A completely different story, the Quran of the Middle Ages, but still, in these already Islamic legends, the story of palaces, dukes, beauty, court, ladies, it was explained through the Quranic context, although it ascended to ancient Egypt. And, you know, for us, sometimes this incredible empty culture of Egypt seems amazing. And I remember a completely wonderful story. I will show you a monument later today, when we were sitting in the inspectorate of Memphis with my friends, I have a lot of friends there. I was in Memphis for the first time in 11907. A long story. One person runs in there and says they found Zuleika. I say, in what sense? What? Well, a very beautiful statue, a female Zuleika. That is in fact the context that seems medieval to us. For modern Egypt, it is alive. And in the same way, in this medieval context, ancient Egyptian fragments, the centre of Memphis, the centre that is shown to tourists today, it was ennobled by Nasser in honour of my praise in the 1950s. And that phoenix of Amenhotep II, which you saw, fallen giant, he stands in the centre of such a museum in the open air. And when a person today usually asks his guide, can I see something else besides this museum? The guide always says, nothing else has survived. This is not true. He does not know that there is a real Memphis behind this fence. As Abdul Latif described, the city is closed for half a day, walking in any direction. And the other thing is that all this closed archaeological zones close quite seriously. We are almost everywhere with you today. Visit and try to understand what was this wonderful city. Jean-Claude Galvin, magnificent French architect, helps us to present one of the great capitals of ancient Egypt. We first look with you at the geography of the city, then the coloured arrows will appear on the frame and you will immediately recognise many monuments which are well known to you by books. So, breaking all stereotypes, Memphis was on the western bank of the Nile. And the history of the city was not simple yet, because when coming to the delta, the Nile changed its course quite often. Therefore, from time to time, the successful king completed or rebuilt the city, which was very vulnerable to the river. Still building Memphis, King Menes, the king of the first dynasty, in the area of modern Helouan, builds giant dams. The Helouan Dam, the first dynasty, has been preserved to this day. It, of course, was renewed, strengthened by both ancient Egyptian pharaohs and the first Islamic rulers. But think that the dam, preserved from the 30th century to the new era, which protected Memphis, still alive. The centre of Memphis, I don't even need an arrow to show you, was a giant temple complex called Kutka Ptah, the yard of the vital force of the god Ptah. The temple was one of the largest and most famous throughout the entire Egyptian history. Moreover, this temple provided great service to Egypt itself, because when the Greeks came here, the Kutka Ptah turned out to be something poorly pronounced for them, so a Greekized form appeared, Ahyptos. This Ahyptos became the basis of the word Egypt, which later entered all European languages. Just like in the 7th, 6th centuries BC, when Egypt was surrounded by Persian troops, here in Memphis there was a throne of satrapy, Persian satrapy, and this satrapy was called Al-Masriya. What happened later became Arabic. Al-Masriya is the modern name of Arabic Egypt. Therefore, from the very beginning, this incredible fusion, this incredible flow of cultures was very famous. In the centre was the temple of Ptah. Closer to the Nile were the royal palaces, other residences which we will talk about today. And up there you see the fields, the pyramid, and in the second rectangle on the left there is Saqqara. There is the pyramid of Djoser. Think for a second that Memphis has always lived close to its history. Imagine that you are an Egyptian living, let's say, during the reign of Ramses II in the 13th century BC. Open the window in the morning and you have pyramids of the 27th century BC. You have this ringing history, multi-generational history of Egypt. It is in front of you. In many ways, as it seems to me, it affected the special deep tradition of wisdom that appeared in this city. This is what gave birth to the legend about the search for wisdom, and this is what became the basis for several amazing personalities in the history of ancient Egypt who were engaged in the history of their country. Memphis is a priory, a historical city. It is historical. The Egyptians themselves were very interested in the past of their country. Let's see the hieroglyphs for a minute. These are the names that were associated with this city, and it is important for us to understand its fate today. The first name on top is Menepher, sturdy and beautiful. This is how the pyramid of Pepi, Boké and Saqqara was called. This very successful name quickly began to be associated with the whole city. Sturdy, beautiful, wonderful. The adjective Menepher Pepi, a reference to the pyramid of Pepi, pine, and then to the whole city. This is why the name Menepher and the word Memphis, it has ancient Egyptian roots. The second one on top is Jedusut, the name of the pyramid of Zar-Teti. This is the 24th century BC. Nevertheless, this is the term that was very beautiful, that reflected the dream of the ancient Egyptians of eternity. Sturdy, beautiful. Therefore, in the era of several kings, the city bore this name. The third one on top is Kut-Kapta, the main name of the city, which, as we understood, also reflected the history of Egypt itself. The fourth name on top is Ankhtaui, the life of both lands, because on top of the delta is Lower Egypt, and on the bottom of the valley is Upper Egypt, and Memphis stands like a seal in the middle of this blooming flower of water lily, and therefore the life of both lands. There was even another version, Miktawi, the scales of both lands. It is said that in Memphis, when it is the capital, the fate of the Egyptians and the fate of the inhabitants. And finally, the lowest inscription of the two hieroglyphs is actually the oldest name of the city, the white walls which rise to the fortress that Menes put here in the 30th century BC. And these walls of the white fortress became one of the symbols of the city and became such a centre of topography, because about the temple of Ptah they said to the south of the walls, and from the Assyrian residents about the temple of the goddess Neith, they said, yes, these are the northern walls. That is, these white walls of the original fortress. They became the centre of such a topography of Memphis, if you can say so. So let's see what's ahead of us. So the red arrow, Kut-Kapta, the main territory of the temple of the god Ptah in Memphis. The white arrow to the north is the temple of the goddess Neith. That is the very original fortress of Imbu Hedge and the main royal residence of the 16th, 15th centuries BC. The white arrow shows in the very south the temple of Kador, the great ruler of beautiful Sycamore. A legendary tree grew, and Kador's mother was venerated here not only as a symbol of love, motherhood and protection, but as the goddess of the vital forces of nature. This temple has not been excavated to this day. We have a huge number of mentions of it, but today there are villages on top of this area. The dark blue arrow below, which points to the lake, by the way, appreciate the number of channels and lakes inside the city. These are the famous piranha shops, good paths. On the one hand, this is a trading quarter, this is a market, this is a place where, at the request of the Egyptian kings, first the Cretan masters, and then from the 15th century BC, the Phoenician masters built ships. In the Egyptian language, the word ship is kibinyut. This is a Phoenician word. They even borrow the name of the ship because it was always an ordered product. From here, from Perennefer, along the numerous slopes of the Nile in the delta, the Egyptian ships either went with the warriors of Syro-Phoenicia, or with trading contacts all over the world at that time. It is important to say right away, and today there will be an illustration of this, that in the Peronifera area the foreigners traditionally lived. The Syrians lived here, the Phoenicians lived here, and think that it was here in the 4th century BC. The Egyptian master for the first time depicted a clay tarot caricature on an Indian merchant. It is here in Memphis in the 4th century that the Indians will come for the first time. Here in Memphis in the 1st century BC, already under Cleopatra, the first piece of silk fabric from China will come. Memphis has always been such an attraction, a shopping centre, and it is clear that the Versailles area, the market area, the area of constant interaction with foreigners, it has become part of the city where the foreigners all sorts of greeted. Further with this part of the city, it is clear. Let's look at the necropolis. The purple arrow, so cherry, shows Nabusir. Somewhere there are almost invisible the pyramids of Giza, and the green arrow is the complex of the Djossars, Saqqara, and the beginning of the great Saqqara necropolis, the total length of which about 7 kilometers. And finally, the bright yellow arrow on the left is Dashur. This is one of the southern pyramids of the necropolis. That is, we can imagine like there were the great Ephesians with the western and eastern coast, with the coast of Jiva, with temples and necropolises. And so here, only here, the scope was absolutely grandiose. And plus, I remind you that in different stages of the history of Egypt from time to time, some part of Memphis still flooded, and then often some large area of the city was rebuilt, which made the city fresh, very new, corresponding to some rules of fashion and architecture and style of that time. The great lord of Memphis is Ptah. The name of the god Ptah is translated as the one who creates the form. It is with the figure of Ptah one of the most important episodes of the Egyptian theological thought. In the largest cities of Egypt, as you know, there were their own cosmogonic systems. They did not conflict with each other. On the contrary, they complemented the understanding of man in his attempts to realize the deepest symbolism of the creation of the universe. In a nutshell, I will remind you of this story while you enjoy the absolutely wonderful image of this god of the 14th century BC, one of the most famous monuments from the tomb of Tutankhamun. The body of Ptah is always embalmed because it is associated with the secret forces of the earth. Everything here is covered with the ornament of riches in the translation of the Cerebian feather. He is as if covered with the wings of the goddess protector. On his shoulders is his wide necklace, symbol of the sun god. The face is highlighted on the head of a bright blue faience, imitation of a chepes. Such a chepets were worn by jewelers, metallurgists, all those who were directly connected with art, with craft, and with the secret knowledge associated with the materials and depths of the earth. In the hands of Ptah, his traditional giselle, it is 3-part, the lower part, 4 crossbars. This is a jad. This is a symbol of invulnerability. Then the loop-shaped cross, this is Ankh, a symbol of eternal life, which you all know. And then a little higher, looking at us, the head of a sacred animal, this is a staff, Ankh Jad Uaz, a great staff which says that Ptah, as one of the forms of the eternal God, he has the power to create and create. The history of this God is closely related to the idea of the mysterious power of the earth, about the symbolism of precious stones, about the mysteries of metals. And before I talk about cosmogony, I will give one very good example so that my words about the symbolism of metals are not incomprehensible to you. The 13th century BC, Ramses the Great, there is a coronation, and all the gods at the time of the coronation give him some kind of blessing. And then representatives of the temple of Ptah in Memphis, they begin to rob the king liquid gold. This is melted gold mixed with oil. According to the so-called decree of Ptah-Tatanin, in which all this is described, it is said that only Ptah has the ability to invest in the human body a part of the gold metal and give this metal the opportunity to become part of the king's body. To find the king through this magic method of robbing gold immortality as far as possible, including bodily. Traditionally, the best jewelers of Ptah were dwarves because, according to legend, dwarves have a particularly high magic power, and these dwarves were the best jewelers who worked at the royal house. We have a lot of images of them, separate mentions, even tombs of such court dwarves, which were associated with the cult of the god Ptah. Finally, Te is associated with the most important idea that in many other cities, telling about creation, the Egyptian wise man speaks about the divine, about heaven, about the unity of the earthly world and the heavenly world. But this unity, how to make this unity? It must be embodied in the mechanism. This mechanism is associated with Ptah. According to legend, it is Ptah who creates the first cult statue of the gods. Knowing the gods, he begins to select those earthly materials from which it is not just appropriate to make a cult statue of the gods, but on the contrary, to make such statues so that the gods want to enter them. Therefore, speaking in modern language, one of the most important aspects of Ptah and his mythology is the materialization of the deity. And this is a very important detail because it is a deep Egyptian tradition associated with sacred metals, with materials, with minerals, with everything that divine statues are made of. There were a lot of images of Ptah in Memphis. I love these two statues very much. On the right is a frame of how they were found in the zone of the eastern entrance to the temple. The monuments were made in the 14th century during Amenhotep III from quartzite. Look what a fantastic work. Ancient Egyptians, if you look at the symbolism of the material, called quartzite biad an excellent stone and believed that it was frozen sunbeams. I specifically show you, I'm sorry, I'm not a museum expert, I'm showing you a shot from the old Egyptian museum in Cairo, because now in the new museum of the gem of the statue, it looks like this. It's them. Yes. And I want the amazing monuments of Memphis to be presented in your memory as they should be presented. And not only as you can see them today in a row of gods in the same pyramid of Giza, which unfortunately does not always show Egyptian masterpieces in the best way. Quite rarely in Egyptian culture we see colossal statues of gods, and most often colossal you see the king, and God is some kind of hidden figure, hidden in the holy temple, there in the dark, in the golden nause, in the reliquaries, in the cult of Tepta as a materializer, as the creators of the universe, of these minerals and materials. Colossal statues were common, which quite seriously distinguished it from many other gods of Egypt. Oddly enough, but we know about the secrets of the cult of Tepta, thanks not to an Egyptian, but to a foreigner. In the 8th century BC, Egypt won the kings of Nubia. A portrait of one of them, Shabak, now Shabak, is next to you on the right. And here Shabak, according to the preserved document, he came to the courtyards of the already half-abandoned temple of Tepta. Egypt began to slowly bow to the sunset of its culture. The first thing that Shabak managed to do, he drove the merchants out of the courtyards of the temple. In my opinion, This is a topic that goes through all cultures, that there is no place for merchants in the temple. And then exploring the ruined temple of Tepta, conditionally ruins, he finds a quote of a flower eaten by worms. And when he opens this flower, he finds there one of the oldest texts that tells how the bird created the world. Shabak asks that this flower be transferred to a stone, because this is knowledge that needs to be passed on to future generations. Fragments of this prolific text are now on the left of the portrait of Shabak, who did what should have been done by the Egyptians. But anyway, we are still discussing this, recalling the loss. This is what the stone looks like. It is called the Stone of Shabak. It began to be stored in London in the British Museum, and in the Middle Ages they tried to make acorns out of it. This is not an image of the sun. This is an attempt to make acorns, and accordingly I will now put a drawing on a real monument so that you understand what volume of text is lost in the centre. And meanwhile, the second title of this wonderful text is the Monument to the Memphian Theology, or the Memphian Theological Tractate. And the text tells how the waters of the pre-eternity, and in these waters of the pre-eternity, the bird is born as the great androgyne, because he is the bird Nun. Nun is the Egyptian name of the pre-eternal ocean from which everything came out, and in which everything will return in the final times. So he is the mother of all gods, the father of all gods. He is a bird in the male and female hypostasis. He is Nun and Nunet. He is a deity that appears in those times when there was no male and female, when there was no heaven and earth, when it was not clear any gender differences, or, as the Egyptian texts say, when there were no two things yet. And this incomprehensible, mysterious deity that rumbles with its thoughts inside the pre-eternal ocean of the house Nun, it conceives the world and the whole universe in the heart. This is very important, because in Memphis, God creates the world that he conceived in his heart. The heart for the ancient Egyptians is generally a source of intellect, thinking, feelings, emotions. This is what will later be weighed on the coffin in the court of the gods, in order to determine whether a person is right or not. And then, thinking everything in his heart, the bird begins opening his mouth to call the names of all things. Out of these 7 pronunciations, the whole universe is created. By the way, it is here that the 7 pronunciations of the God of the pre-eternal rise in the Kabbalistic tradition. This is all taken, from ancient Egypt. And then when he speaks with his lips and tongue, as this text says, pronounces the names of this world, and as soon as he begins to pronounce this world comes into existence, his lips and teeth are other gods of the universe. And here, every time you want to turn off your Western mind and begin to listen carefully to what you are reading, imagine in a black, invisible space, in a bell-like ocean of chaos, a huge mouth with teeth and lips of which other gods become, which at this moment take on their form. And then, from these lips, with such an incredible flow, the whole universe is poured out, with all the essence that is in it. The other world, in the opinion of the ancients, the other world does not mean the afterlife, but the world of gods, spirits, everything that is inaccessible to man. Everything is built there according to the principle of 7 units. Everything is 7-dimensional there. Our sun world, already created in it, according to the ancient Egyptians, is all 9-dimensional. Therefore, there in that world, there are 7 forms of a bird, and then when finally this ocean is incredibly boiling, and the world is ready for creation. A huge water nymph rises out of it, a blinding white one on which the sun is born. And the God of the sun, he is created, and he is the one who further creates the universe. And the God of the birds, he is all that is connected, I will say so figuratively, with the roots of this water flower, with the first reason from which the sacred water flower rose. Now, in a minute, I will show the images in the Egyptian tradition. The god Nefertum, the sacred water lily, is the son of the god of the bird. Further in this text, which I will not retell in detail, otherwise we will stay here to live, because literally every phrase, every word needs to be analysed and commented on. Then it is told about what the end of death is, what immortality is, why the mystery of life is in Verna. And the main conclusion, the conclusion of such a feeling when you read this text, is that the Egyptian goes along his Nile Valley, and it is worth a deep look at some phenomenon that is next to him, and he understands the meaning of creation in it. The grain that rises, the water lily that rises in the east when the sun rises, a text of absolutely incredible beauty. It is immensely offensive what volume we have lost, although we must pay tribute to the British Museum. They are now doing micrographic analysis of this stone. That is, some additional fragments can already be read. In general, in front of you is one of the most serious, not only ancient Egyptian, but in general, ancient monuments that speak about how man thought about the creation of the world. It is clear that the stone was created in the times of Shebach, already in the first millennium BC, but the language is archaic. That is, most likely it does not deceive, and there really was a scroll of eaten worms. The language of this text dates back to the language of the ancient kingdom of the era of the pyramids. That is, apparently it was a very ancient, some kind of prototype. The god Ptah is the source for the ancient Egyptians, which is associated with the earth as a blessed grave. And the blessed grave for the Western ear sounds a little dubious, because we are afraid of death, and for the ancient Egyptian, this is the blessed land, the dry land of the Nile Valley. This is the place where the grain is laid, then it is watered. Water in Memphis is associated with the cult of the goddess Hathors, but it rises. This is one of the sources of eternal life. In the 1st and 13th centuries BC, the wall from the sanctuary of Ptah in his huge temple in Abydos. And you see here at the moment of daily worship, when in Nostia, in a sacred reliquary, there is a statue of the deity. The iconography is perfectly clear to you. And Zar Setia, in one case on the right, brings his palms to the deity in a gesture of dua in a prayer. In another situation, he brings a ptahus, a laden lamp. The lamp was called Ba. In the same way, Ba is called one of the most important entities of man, conditionally, very conditionally, the soul. That is, at the moment of worship, Zar Ptah is brought a lamp of his soul, very poetic, very beautiful, but nevertheless. Another very interesting detail is that, look, the figure of Ptah is shown embalmed, and the beard is very specific, trapezoidal. This is the beard of the living. This is the beard that the living Zar wears most often, in contrast to the beard of the New World, which you all remember from the plaited hibiscus on the mask of Tutankhamun. And this beard shows that Ptah is the one who is limited. He is the border between the worlds. He is the border of what is on the earth and the border of what is under the earth. And this is in this, including his strength. Another relief from Abydos, and again before us Setia, who exalts the incense of the holy Ladan, and before him two deities. which are very important for what I'm talking about now. The first deity before him is a male figure with a lion's head, holds in his hands the symbol of immortality. He has a golden falcon on his head, and on the golden falcon dissolves the water nymph. This is the triumphal form of Nefertum, the very god of the water lily flower, who was the son of Ptah in Memphis, and who was associated with a new day, with a new morning. Nefertum, like God, has secret forces of nature. There are two great kingdoms. The first kingdom is all the plants, as a world of healing, as a world which is inspired by various deities. The second story, all the Egyptian deities are ambivalent. Nefertum is the great lord of poisons. We collect the plants themselves. Some of them are healing, others are poisonous, and this and that. Two parts of nature, and all this is the kingdom of the great god Nefertum, which can be depicted with a lion's head. The figure of the godly elder with such a crown, made of two stylized reed feathers, is Nun. It is written there, Nun is the father of all gods. This is the most predestined ocean, inside which Ptah is as a source of life and a source of the future creation of the world. In Memphis, as in other cities of Egypt, the gods were revered by the triads, and here is another relief of Zobodos, because I really want to show you the gods in their perfect iconography. Ptah is with his wife. The wife of Ptah is Sekhmet, the great lion-headed goddess. On the one hand, the war of rage, the uprising and the plague. On the other hand, the healing of all diseases and the great teaching. Sekhmet is very often not only in Memphis, but also here in Zobodos. It is directly associated with Ptah, and next to the sun disk on the head of the goddess, there is written Sekhmet, and love with Ptah. That is, this personal attitude to the great goddess is very clearly shown here. So Ptah, Sekhmet and Nefertum, in addition to the other gods, who of course also found their shrines in Memphis. Curiously, Ptah and Sekhmet are so associated with their capital that sometimes such reliquaries, here are the reliquaries of the 13th century BC, they depict a husband and wife in such a complex construction. This construction with a roof, with a seal, is an imitation of Inbuketch, the first fortress of Memphis. That is, these are the gods in their original, most ancient house, and such reliquaries could be found in many other temples of the country. What other episodes of the Egyptian legend of immortality are associated with Ptah? Well, let's look at the wonderful statue which is on the left, a sculptural group. It is from Memphis. Here is Ramses II in a huge crown of henna on the left, and next to him is Ptah Tatanin, Ptah rising from the ground. The symbolism of this god is very simple and very beautiful. Just imagine the spill of the Nile. The Nile spilled, everything is in the water. Then the Nile begins to descend, and at some point this Nile, endless, spilled, resembles the Nub, the waters of the pre-eternal ocean of chaos. When the water of the Nile begins to descend, the first hills of the land appear. This is the very rising earth. And these hills of land, which the Egyptians saw every year when the spill of the Nile ended, they made him return to the idea of creation, that once from the pre-eternal waters, the first fragment of the earth appeared. And that force that makes this hill rise from the water, it is embodied in Egypt in the image of the god Ptah Tatanin, a god who played a very important role in those rituals that were related to the victory over death. And vice versa. On the right is also a relief from Memphis from the 9th century BC. This is Saka'ar. This is just the embodiment of death. You see here an embalmed figure, the head of a falcon. On the head of this deity is the crown of Atef, This is the traditional crown of Osiris. This is the god of death. He has a sacred plant, an onion. Because the onion is dry, it is dead. But when you plant an onion, a green feather of eternal life. And at the Egyptian funeral ceremonies, at the funeral feasts, they necessarily put bouquets in the centre of the feast table from the bundles of the grown onion, because it was a symbol of immortality. Similarly, in the rituals of Sakar, for example, his sacred boat, Hinu, is present. The sacred boat was made from the bones of sacred animals. That is, in general, the spectacle is so scary. The boat is made of bones. There was a hill of sand in the centre, and on the hill of sand, an embalmed falcon is always depicted, which with its wings embraces the sand pyramid. Inside the sand pyramid, either an egg or a grain. A sign that under the apparent state of death, under the sand hill, inside is hidden, still unproven life. That is why Sakar was perceived in the Egyptian epilogue as a god of purification ceremonies. Before the new year, the boat Hinu is taken out of the temple. Not necessarily in Memphis, in many other temples there was such a ceremony. And then the boat Hinu bypasses the city against the clock. At this moment, everyone is closed in their homes. It is forbidden to leave the house. And the spirits of chaos, the spirits of disease, are killed by Sakar when he walks around the city. Before that, a sacrifice was made. A sacrifice was made, but most often a goat. And then prayers were written in the name of the god Sakar with red blood, and fingerprints were left. When you now in Upper Egypt will see houses with fingerprints like this, or even whole fives, this is what actually ascends to pre-Islamic Egypt, to the ritual of Sakar. Sakar goes through his entire cycle, then he turns and goes clockwise, starting a new turn in the already purified life. Death as purification, death as a stage without which life is eternal and impossible, death as the environment in which life will definitely be born. In addition to these gods, of course, many other gods, I will spend your time on this wonderful fragment of the stele of the Tsar's friend, the only prince, the heir to the head of the city, the vizier Parhatep. He stands in the upper register before the gods. This is Nefertum and Semet, and here is a large fragment just now behind me. Accordingly, another form of Nefertum in the form of a human figure, and here on his head a water lily dissolves. From there you can see two falcon feathers, the same attribute, the same symbol he has in his hands. Behind him is not just an addition. Behind him is one of the forms of Semet Bastet, the ruler of Antowi, the Lady of Heaven. Remember Antowi, the life of both lands. Antowi is one of the areas of Memphis. Here is such a vine goddess next to him. At the bottom, first they worship the god of the sun. This is the son of Aharathi, the son of the gods of the horizons. Then Mat, the goddess of truth, and a rare form of the goddess Cathor. Cathor is the ruler of the south of Sycamore. This is the deity that will be important to us today when we look at archaeological monuments. So for now it's a myth, an iconography that will later gain its earthly embodiment. And of course, the great Semet. By the way, the great temple of Semet in Memphis has not yet been found. A huge number of texts talk about it. This is to the question when I am often asked, tell me, what percentage of the material was found or not in ancient Egypt? One of the most famous temples in Egypt has not been found yet. That is, it lies somewhere in modern villages. And in this fragment of the relief from the tomb of an official from the 14th century to the new era, he and his family worship the great ruler beloved. Semet is great. Here he brings her papyruses, flowers of water lilies, Great anger, great rebellion, great mercy, great healing are one of the most striking and all-powerful goddesses of ancient Egypt. Well, concluding this presentation, I will show you a small blue bird. This is a coloured vignette from the 12th century to the New Era, from the Papyrus Harith, in which Ramses III worships the main gods of Egypt. They are in this papyrus. In the illustration, all three appear. And here is the bird of Semet and Nefertum. Pay attention to the pedestal on which the legs of the bird stand. This is a rectangle with a beveled front edge. This is how the name of the goddess of truth, Maat, is inscribed, because the bird is Hetephermat, pacified by the truth. That is, he, like one of the creators of the universe, he stands on his feet on the truth, a sign that he is with the truth, one whole. Plus, the hieroglyph of Maat's name is inscribed in the form of a lake, because according to legend, inside the eternal ocean of Nuna, there is a super deep lake of the purest water, where all the purity comes from. And this is the lake of Kibbe, on which, relying on the feet of the truth, there is a bird creating this world. I will mention a few times about the aliens, and said that there were alien quarters. And of course, in these alien quarters, even alien gods were worshipped. In Egypt, in the era of the New Kingdom, that is from the 16th century to the New Era, when the Egyptian troops reached Anatolia and saw Euphrates, they were not only shocked, but they also made all sorts of trade contacts. Before you is a rare ostrakon, that is a piece of limestone with a sketch of an artist, and this is Ashtoreth, the great Phoenician goddess, who was, among other things, the patroness of horses. She jumps naked on a horse, by the way. To sit on a horse at the top in Egypt was called a bad Asian habit. A decent Egyptian rides only on a wheelbarrow, no horses at the top. But here is Ashtoreth, who was a Phoenician at the same time, goddess of passionate love and goddess of war. She is depicted here in Egypt as a daughter, including a bird in the manuscript. Ashtoreth, her younger sister, Anad, Raship, Baal, Sutik, Kedishet, and many other important goddesses and gods of the Levant. All of them had their temples in Memphis. This was the only cosmopolitan city that is, the foreigners there were revered. I will give you an example, an interesting fragment from the letter of a lady named Stika. She is a singer, and she tells about the beauties of her city, Memphis, to her friends. Stika was a singer in the temple of the god Ptah, and her friend was a singer in the temple of the goddess Mut in Karnak. The grain storage of our city is full of wheat and barley. Its hills are covered with different herbs and flowers, and the lakes are full of buds and lilies. The sweet aroma of oil is abundant here, and there is abundance of incense here. Many vessels of oil are on the market near my house. Asians of Memphis sit freely, trust them, and hug them. This is about cosmopolitanism. And then she describes to her friend that there was a holiday in the temple and an ensemble of acrobats that were known all over the country. A dancer from the south came. She triumphed at the competition over the northern girl and pressed her leg to her neck and rested her hand on the ground and showed such a thing that it is impossible to show. The noblest women of Memphis sat resting with branches and greenery in their hands. Further, this is an amazing correspondence from the 13th century to the New Era. And, for example, there is a story about it, it can be quoted a lot, how this lady in Memphis, Vina, was very busy in the temple. She was a senior singer. She really wanted to go to the Fiwa, And she writes everything about her friend that, well, wait a little, I will come. And she had another task. She was a singer, and in the temple of the goddess Mut in Karnak, there was one of the most famous choir groups of women in the whole country. And then she writes an enthusiastic letter to her friend, because the Temple of the Bird for a long time was collecting the necessary funds to pay in Karnak to the south, and Karnak sent for 10 days its female choir ensemble to the Temple of the Bird in Memphis. And she writes to her friend that it is incredible that she had never heard, and now she understands why it was worth. And the Temple of the Bird in Memphis, such incredible funds, that really incredible divine voices, harp, lyre, all this collection, alas, unfortunately, of the lost music of ancient Egypt. Of course, in the Temple of the Bird in Memphis, and in general in Memphis, the great man was revered, the earthly man who became God, Imhotep, the great architect, the founder of the Egyptian tradition of wisdom, the man who built for his king Nechirichet, later called Djoser, the oldest Egyptian pyramid, the seventh pyramid of Djoser in the necropolis of Saqqara. You know perfectly well. And this is how he was depicted. He has the same jewellery as the bird. On his hands, on his knees, he has an open scroll. According to legend, this is his most famous work, The Doctrine of Life. The man was an astronomer, the creator of the calendar of 365 days. He is the creator of the main canon of Egyptian architecture. I do not get tired of repeating that every Egyptian poet, whether he is a king or a schoolboy, when he was a child, picking up a wire for a letterbox, he dropped the first drop in memory of Imhotep. In Memphis, Imhotep was revered as the divine son of the bird, and his cult flourished for many millennia. This statue in the Imhotep Museum in Saqqara, this is the 7th century BC. Imhotep lived in the 27th century BC, 2,000 years of the cult, in fact, even more. In Greco-Roman times, he was associated with Asclepius and his huge temple Asclepion, it was called so in Greek manner, existed for many centuries. The history of Memphis, as I have already begun to tell you, began with archaeological finds on the territory of the Temple of the Bird. Here's another scheme, and the Temple of the Bird, just the same as the bird hunt, it is surrounded by a red frame. And this is a sketch of the 1850s when Joseph Hekikian Bey, the name has already sounded, he finds a huge 11-metre statue of Ramses II. She absolutely amazed him. The statue was broken into 6 fragments, and immediately after the find, Hekikian writes about how it would be wonderful to show such a statue to the world. It is necessary to connect it from parts. This statue is one of the symbols of Egypt. It has a completely amazing history. I think that His Majesty Ramses II, with whom it was erected, would like the history of the subsequent of this statue. So it lay in the early 20th century in the suburb of Bedresheim, that is, next to the Temple of the Bird, a huge crown of the Upper and Lower Egypt, still framed by 2 stylized ostrich feathers, and on top, in fact, there was still a sun disk on the crown. It was one of the main tourist attractions of Egypt at the turn of the 19th and 20th centuries. These shots were full albums of travellers. Well, I just want to show you still the size of the statue, because nothing allows a person think about the divine like the growth of a person next to some grandiose monument. As a result, the statue was decided to sell to England. Egyptian architect Muhammad Ali sold it to England, but the English could not pull it out, even in parts, so it did not get into the British Museum. And in the 1950s, then Prime Minister of Egypt, Gamal Abdel Nasser, promoting the idea of Shah Masri, an Egyptian personality, and saying that the basis of Egypt is Pharaonia. This is the land of pharaohs, first of all, drags the statue. And the rarest shot stands Ramses. He was put on the station square in the centre of Cairo. So this square is still and bears the name Maidan Ramses. And here in the 1950s, by the way, what a funny portrait of Nasser for those who still love the Arab history of Egypt. And this was a symbol of a new Egypt, a new national awareness, a new understanding that with all the Arab roots, Egypt grows on the roots of Pharaonia, on the roots of pharaonic Egypt. Ramses stood for a very long time on the square until the 2000s. For the first time in 2002, it became clear that he was just very bad from the city that was around him, because there was always a terrible movement of the highway. As a result, the city created an aggressive chemical shell on it, which damaged the granite, and then the incredible happened to him. Before I tell you about it, the rarest shot few people know, but in 1973, Cairo was recognised by the International Commission as the cleanest city on the planet. So, my friends, and there is a fountain, flowers. I first got to Cairo in 1906. I found the fountain not working and the lake was already full, but once Cairo was like this, and Ramses stood on a very beautiful 3-metre pedestal, then the most difficult operation was developed. It was customary not to disassemble it into pieces again, so as not to lose fragments of the monument. And standing for 10 hours, Ramses was taken through the whole of Cairo, from Giza, from Maidan Ramses to Giza, to the building of the then future new great museum in which he was supposed to be. It was completely restored, colossal, centimetre thick layers of dirt of the modern city. And so His Majesty returned to Memphis, where he came from, and so it was installed in the great atrium of the new great museum in Giza. The monument is very beautiful. The crown of Upper and Lower Egypt is installed on the nemesis on the front plate. The trapezoid-shaped beard, the embossed shindit behind the belt, the royal dagger, very beautiful bracelets with the names of Ramses II. But in my opinion, the most beautiful element of this monument, it is hidden nearby. This is Bentonat, one of his favourite daughters, the Queen of Syria, who so tenderly touches the leg of her father, the ruler. All her titles are written nearby. She is the royal daughter. She is the queen in the space of the temple. By the way, it is curious to our conversation about the fact that in Egypt at that time there were popular Asian deities. Bentonat is a Syrian name. The daughter of the goddess Anat, that is the warrior who's the younger sister of the goddess Ashtoreth. That is even the royal daughter she was, by the way, a native of Memphis. Her mother, the Queen Setnafret, was born here in Memphis, so even the royal daughter was named in honour of the goddess. Appreciate the work. This is granite, my friends. See what a dress she has, tied with a knot under the chest, a large wig, a huge outfit of the star Sirius. This is the outfit of Sepadet. She's like Sirius, next to His Majesty the Sun. That is, there is such a solar and star symbolism. She plays incredibly beautifully. This is one of the most beautiful images of the Romanesque princesses of Tsarevna, which have been preserved to our time. Therefore, when you are in the Great Museum, be sure to bypass it. Do not miss Bentonat. It would seem that around you can bypass the monument. It stands, by the way, on the hill of land that rose from the lake. That is, this is a good ancient Egyptian symbolism. People approach the princess, take a selfie and rush on. And sadly, one of the most beautiful women of Egypt from the 13th century to the new era, the granite princess, was the second, The first of the pair, the Alabaster Princess, was found by the adventurer Giovanni Caviglia in 1821. Giovanni Caviglia worked for the British consul Henry Salt, and there in Bedrashin, next to the southern gates of the Abtak temple, he found such a lying statue. Despite the fact that part of the statue was heavily damaged by salty groundwater, still it is rather not an alabaster but rather a marbleized limestone. In general, it is not granite, it is a softer stone. Everyone was amazed by the perfection of the appearance of the princess. And by the way, the sensation was such that European newspapers wrote about it. In the diaries of our Vladimir Golenishtchev, the first Egyptologist, there is a note in which Boris Alexandrovich Turaev, the second great scientist, writes to his friend that Boris Alexandrovich, I have a trouble. Every time I go to Egypt, at the time when the waters rise, I go to Mitrakim, to Ramses, to look, and there is a pit, and there is water in it, and there is only one lake, and I can't see the statue. It was also bought by the English. This is the second English trouble. They also could not pull it out of Egypt, despite the fact that the money was paid to Muhammad Ali. But we must pay tribute to them. The statue produced a sensation thanks to newspaper publications, and then the engineering corps from London was sent specifically to Egypt in order to raise the statue. I show unique shots. These are British officers. They take pictures of the statue of Ramses, and the technology is being prepared. Of course, they could not raise it vertically. He had no legs. His legs were broken off, but they wanted to at least turn it over and put it in a higher place so that it would not be flooded with water. When the statue was turned over, you could go down the stairs into the pit and see the monument of incredible beauty. This is one of the most outstanding masterpieces of Egyptian monumental sculpture. At full growth, when it stood without damage, it was 12 metres high, marbled limestone, pink tint. That is, this stone was specially sought. And all the elements of the statue are, of course, amazing, starting with the smile of Ramses, ending with the way the cosmetic lines of his eyes and the fold on the neck under the beard, the fold of the skin. Well, every time you look at such monuments, you, of course, think about how much the Egyptians could work with elegance, with monumental monuments, with grandiose ones. Let's walk around the statue. Here's such a story. I just happen to have a little man there for size, for comparison. On the shoulders are the names of Ramses. In his hands he squeezes the cylinders of mix with papyrus, in the original with vines, to the right of the dominion of the Egyptian land. Here is such a face, and appreciate here this marbleization of limestone. That is, it is really of such a pink colour. The work is absolutely fantastic in its symmetry and in the way all the details are worked out. A miracle, of course, that the monument has survived. On the belt of the hip belt, behind which the dagger is depicted, here's a very beautiful rebus. Let's try to divide it. You see that in the centre there are two figures, Ptah and Sekhmet, standing back to back. Ptah in our direction, down, Sekhmet looking there. And here, respectively before Sekhmet, the personal name of Ramses, loved by Ammon, the living for Sekhmet, and that part, the half that is to us, here's the name that the king received during the ascent to the throne name, Ra, strong, true, chosen for Ra, Ptah, part of Ptah's flesh. That is, the buckle itself is a reading rebus, which inscribes the figure of Ramses into the world of the gods of Memphis and into the world of such royal nobility embodied in the temple. If on the granite colossus was Queen Bentana, then here, in addition to a lot of various details, here is another of his sons. Now we will see. First, the bracelet, also with royal names. The hand is huge. People usually like to take pictures with the hand of Ramses to show his incredible monumentality. And there, at his feet, stands one of the sons, judging by the specific headdress, the high priest Ptah Haimos. We will come to his figure with you today. This is a man who played a very big role, realised once again this magnificence, and as a result, in the 1950s, I will say again, praise to Nasser around the statue which was raised to a higher place. Such a museum was built. Atrium is a centre, a museum in the open air. You can come there, buy a ticket, £80 worth of Egyptian, and go there to see not only the giant Ramses, but also those amazing monuments which are exhibited there. Everything is very simple, there is no backlight, but the monuments are such that there is breathtaking. And when you enter the museum, I got a very good shot. You go to the door and there lies a huge face of His Majesty, and then people freeze and do not know where to go, how beautiful it is. And in general, of course, monumental Egyptian sculpture is a completely separate genre. It is amazing. Almost everyone loves this topic. Around the perimeter of the central part of Memphis, a large number of various sculptural monuments were found. All of them were lying in earthquakes and this unstable wet soil, and this statue of Ramses actually had a very interesting story. This is a shot from the 70s, American. First of all, note that the statue was painted on granite. This is clearly visible. On the necklace, you see the red stripes, they painted granite, which is quite unexpected for us. And this statue turned out to be very ancient. That is, it was made somewhere in the 20th century BC. Ramses usurped it. That is, it was made somewhere 700 years before Ramses II. Ramses liked to usurp other people's monuments. Most likely it was Sancerre I. The power of Egypt to restore you, to restore all these monuments, did not exist. And here are the 70s, 1926, the great French woman Christiane de Roche-Noblecourt, she makes an exhibition, Ramses the Great in the Grand Palais, a grandiose exhibition. And when she roamed Europe, America wanted to make it bigger. And in the end, the city of Memphis, only the city of Memphis is American, paid for the restoration of the statue of Ramses. Ramses sailed on a ship to America, stood there in front of the exhibition centre while the blockbuster show was going on, Ramses the Great in his time, and then accordingly in 1978, if I remember correctly, Ramses returned and became another centre throughout the archaeological zone of Memphis. This is the territory where again you can go and see the most different monuments, and in the centre there is this wonderful image which was restored for American money. The museum is constantly filled with the most valuable monuments that were found in the process of living archaeological research around the city. Research, I repeat, is going on actively. But look, right there, right behind the fence, there are houses, and these houses stand on the territory, on the sacred quarter of the Ptah of Memphis. That is, under all these houses, there are absolutely incredible monuments. That is, it is incredible. I will prove to you today at the end of our conversation. In the archaeological zone, there are many amazing objects of varying degrees of safety. Well, if the sculptural group of Ramses Ptah, then this absolutely wonderful goddess Hathor, this is not the top of the column. When the processional path, then sometimes they were near the Sphinx alley, by the way, near these processional paths, such small chapels, sanctuaries, where there were some emblems of the beloved gods. This is the emblem of the goddess Hathor, not Capital. That is, people having stopped at the time of pilgrimage, they could bring her their offerings, pray, tune in to the goddess Hathor, to the temple that would lead them, this alley, this path of pilgrims. How did it all look? English reconstruction. This is the eastern pylon of the Ptah of Memphis. Well, what should we pay attention to? Well, not only the abundance of columns, and you understand the level of these monuments. Look carefully at the fence. The fence is all toothy. And these counterforce such pylons which decorate the fence. They narrow up. Remember reliquary, there were Ptah and Sekhmet. More reliquary narrowed. There were elements of the fence on top. This is a specific fence of the temple of Ptah, and at the same time each of these counterforce decorated with an image of an ear. This is the ear of the god Ptah, who hears prayers. And near these counterforce they brought some of their gifts with prayers to those pilgrims who by status could not pass inside the temple. It is clear that the temple territory was available to a few. The main pylon is the eastern zone, and behind it is a completely wonderful column hall. All that is yellow is sandstone. All that is red is granite. And when you, at the very beginning of the lecture, remember the swamp with the remains of the columns, this is it. This is a scientific English reconstruction of this part of the temple. This is what it looks like today. A few more frames. The left frame is mine, shot in 2003. Not without it, unfortunately. This is a dump on the side of a village, on the side of the road. A few years ago, the Americans tried to bring all this to the senses. Now everything looks decent. But as in the second frame, which I like on the right, here are the herons, that is the phoenix and bane, as it was in Egyptian mythology, stand on fragments of once a grandiose miracle and the base of one of the columns of the group that you just saw in the reconstruction. And of course, this is a very sad frame. This is all my shooting. This is a closed archaeological zone. This is a fragment of a door portal in the temple. It is granite. Ramses II brings gifts from above to Tahu, from below to Sekhmet. And both times the local residents tried to cut out Ramses' face to sell it. And this is granite. It crumbles. And they didn't succeed. That is, and the face crumbled and they didn't sell it, and they destroyed an amazing ancient monument. And in principle, from such fragments in the future, Egypt plans to recreate parts of the temple of Tahu in this archaeological zone. Another very terrible thing, which is associated with the Aswan Dam. If you look at the upper right corner, there's something white on the granite. This is salt. This is fertilization, which evaporates from the groundwater. Due to the fact that after the construction of the Aswan Dam, the fertility of the Nile dried up, and Egypt uses our domestic fertilization. We supply fertilization in huge quantities. Then this salt comes out of the water on the surface. It practically destroys monuments, even if it is granite. Well, some parts of the temple were lucky. This is next to the archaeological storage. Here's such a fragment of the temple wall granite with the profile of Ramses, with his names, with his story, how he, as a true son, created this place for his father. There were no such great monuments. This is what is written there on the left. And this is to talk about that there's a lot of work here. This is the zone taken from the roof of one of the residential buildings. And residential buildings practically step on Memphis. And when tourists are taken here by bus, they of course do not see this. It is closed behind the fence, and in general it is not necessary to go here, and in general it is prohibited. In order to continue excavation, colossal means are needed to lower the level of the soil, and this is a common and everyday problem of Memphis in all its parts. But once it was like this. The frame on the right is a miraculously preserved fragment of the wall with the image of Ramses II, who defeated the enemies. This is a genuine pigment of the 13th century to the new era. Once it was all like this. The map that appeared on the left, we will need it now. We will look at the main monuments of Memphis which have come to our time. Well, first of all, this huge pale blue frame is the territory of the Temple of Ptah. As you can see, it is all built up. That is, these are modern villages of Bedroshin, Mitrahina, Komler, Rabia, and so on. We are now interested in the dark blue circle, the western gate. That's where we were now, where the columns and the swamp lie. And we move with you to the green circle, where it says Capella Seti Forum. In order for you, if you were in Memphis or you plan to go there for reference, the black frame of the open air museum where this Ramses lies, a large alabaster, so that you can imagine where it is. The size of the entire complex is comparable to the Karnak Temple, only unlike the Karnak Temple, it is under residential development. This story is very sad, and the frames that are in front of you are absolutely unique. These are frames from the archive of Saqqara inspectors, accidentally in the 1950s, when a channel was made that was supposed to take away part of the water from Bedroshain and slightly lower the level of groundwater in Memphis. Egyptian archaeologists find such a small sanctuary. It was popularly called the Throne of Seti because Seti, I built it in Memphis as a sign that he incredibly expanded the territory of the bird temple in the 13th century BC. And Seti puts his throne as a sign that is a special monument, as such a memory, as a relic in honour of his deeds. Inside this sanctuary were found amazing images. The bird sits in the centre, his head has not been preserved. By the way, note that here the base under his feet is made with a beveled plane, because this is the image of the goddess Mat. Here are two goddesses nearby. They both held the baby of Seti, and one of these goddesses is Chesamtet, and the second is Menefret. Menefret is Memphis as it is, because the city in ancient Egyptian is a woman. The city is feminine, it is nude. And Menefret is Memphis. This is Memphis who holds his beloved baby Seti, who built such wonderful monuments. And Chesamtet is the embodiment of the fence of the temples, because he preserved the temples as no one else. That is, this is a recognition of the city's love for its king. And if you look closely at the next frame, what is on the head of Chesamtet is the fence of the temple. Remember, here again we return to the trapezium with a beveled upper plane. That is, here is Memphis and its temples as they are, embodied in the form of great gods. Then this sanctuary was found. It did not receive worthy guards. It was simply left to stand as it is. That's what was left from the gods. After these frames were published in the 90s, just the entrance to the sanctuary was sealed with a brick gate and everything was left. Further, little is seen in these frames, but part of the walls are covered with reliefs, and one Dutch Egyptologist at some point appears at a temporary exhibition in the Metropolitan Museum in New York, and there, with a note on loan that is on temporary exhibition, he finds a relief with an image of the goddess Hathor, who feeds Seti in Georgia. This is a relief with the left wall of the sanctuary. In the museum, this relief came with a false expertise and must be paid tribute to the museum. He immediately bought it from a private collector, and they returned this thing. This relief is now nameless, without indication of where it stands in the Archaeological Museum of Courgady. What it does there is another question, but nevertheless, for a second, imagine the level of the monument, the most elegant relief, the most amazing and rare goddess. And we lost it all, despite the fact that it was found quite recently. This is one of the saddest stories in the story of Memphis, which few will show you and few will tell. The next story, which has a future, although it is also sad, we move with you to the south. There is the temple of the goddess Hathor, the turquoise circle. You see it on the map. You know, I once had such a personal impression. I'm very pleased that there are a lot of rarities of the first magnitude in the materials that I offer you. Because when I was still working in the Pushkin Museum, once my teacher Svetlana Ismailovna Kajaj gave me a book, a catalogue of Ramses the Great, which was just in the American Memphis. I began to scroll this luxurious album, and suddenly there is a turn and there is a plot of land. There are such stones on the ground, just like the goddess Hathor. This has never happened to me with Russian Egyptology. I was shocked. I come to Egypt. Do not ask me what is true and what is not. I got to the temple of the goddess Hathor when it was on the territory of the military zone. In the 1950s, there was a difficult political situation in Egypt with the northern neighbours. And then in the suburb of Mitrachina, there are trenches and there are Egyptian troops. And when the trenches were dug, the Egyptian soldiers accidentally found the temple of Hathor and South Sycamore. These are the capitals of the 13th century BC. This is Ramses II. I will tell you honestly, these are perhaps the most amazing, the most beautiful cathartic capitals in the history of ancient Egyptian art. Further, when the territory of the temple began to be excavated, archaeologists were naturally invited there. This is the 6970s. Egyptian archaeologists are very worthy. They work there. It turned out that there is such a temple under the ground. These faces of Hathor are capitals, columns, which go more than 5 meters deep into this massif. And when the trenches were mowed, in order to understand the level of humidity, this is my shooting from 2003, this frame, it turned out that there is water at a depth of 2 meters. That is either to dry and urgently remove these columns, because if you just dig up the temple and suddenly a pump stops, then it will become a lake and will simply collapse forever. That is why the temple archaeologists are not taken to dig, because it is just a titanic means. And we live in the wrong era, unfortunately, when UNESCO wants to mean something for someone. When you walk there, it is a closed archaeological zone. The first thing that amazes is the incredible timelessness. Incredible, I don't know how to express this emotion, which is like a goddess. Let's just look at these capitals. There are fragments of paintings. I'll show you now too. That is, the perimeter is an open courtyard along the perimeter of a portico with cathodic colonnades, and then the temple goes under the sand. And what is its length? No one knows so far. It is very sad that many columns fell like this. Look what a face. Absolutely fantastic work. Some faces unfortunately collapsed. They are not knocked down by someone, they are damaged by a fallen roof, when there was a roof over it all. And I show you a frame. Here is black and white. This is my frame from 2003, and this colour frame was made by my colleagues 2 years ago. The blue arrow shows you the neck area. Compare. This is the temple that we are losing now right in front of our eyes. Some attempt at conservation was made by the Americans last year, but conservation is one thing And the fact that it just dies under the ground in this swamp, and the amazing temple of the 13th century to the new era, these realities unfortunately are lower. This is not a reproach to Egypt. Why not a reproach? Because there are a huge number of monuments. This is rather a reproach to the international funds that should be engaged in such things. And here is a comparison for you to understand how critical the situation is. So this is when you are asked if you have seen an excavated ancient Egyptian temple. Here's the Hathor of Memphis, the era of Ramses II, with the most amazing relics of the goddess, which I know. They were coloured. This is my frame. It is unique. It is associated with a sad story, because when in the early 2000s the Egyptian inspectors tried to see where the temple is going, what is there, what is the architecture, they found another capital, and this capital was all coloured. And without having this experience, they left it for several hours under the open sun, and what you see on the side of the face is the salt and dried layer of soil that held the painting. Look at the lips. There's a fragment of the original colour. I cannot show, but I once held in my hands a photo of what colour it was. It is not published. It is being prepared for a publication. That is, there is a coloured capital. The temple of the era of Ramses the Great, which was lost just in a few hours due to the fact that the guys who dug the temple did not have the experience of working with the conservation of monuments of this kind. Therefore, you will not see this anywhere. This is a rare thing for the premiere. Separately, in the open air museum, there is the upper part of the wall. Let's imagine this amazing cathartic sanctuary. And under the roof, there is such a frieze consisting of the faces of the goddess Hathor, the sign of dominion under each face, the names of Ramses II, and under each cartouche, under each oval with the name of Ramses II, the sign of gold is depicted the nub, which is also associated with the beloved metal of the goddess Hathor. That is, she is a nub, she is a golden goddess, the great golden mother, the great golden goddess of love. I'm back for a second to the Sphinx, not for the sake of it. This is what is there with water. This is already a dam of 1102 gave these groundwater. Aswan gave a very bad result. This is what is there under the monuments. This is a swamp, and this is what they call Burkit. We will come back to this later. In the final, there will be one very tragic story, a terrible story, which we will definitely discuss with you. In the museum, in the open air, new monuments of gyroscopes. Here is such a wonderful triad. Here Ramses sits. See what intertwined hands. Two goddesses Hathor, two images. The goddess mother with a human face and a sacred cow. The great mother of that, the most sacred sycamore. Let me remind you, the large temple of Hathor, South Sycamore, where the sacred tree grew, it is not excavated. We do not even know, but we know approximately where it is. But there are now residential houses. You can't do anything about it. But the concept is for Egyptian culture is fundamental. So sycamore is a variety of fig. She has a milky juice. So this is the milk of the great mother of gods. Sycamore was the tree of immortality, and the symbolism of this tree was so great that the leaves of the tree were put between the pylons burial, that is, in a mummy. Very often 2 sycamores, a pair of numbers, always planted in the yard, which preceded the tomb. On various late monuments, here's this beautiful singer, Bougamon, from the British Museum. She and her bat, her conditional soul, they bow just before sycamore, and the Great Mother comes out of the tree in order to give water and bread. According to legend, the great sycamore grows on the paths of another world, and when the entity of the deceased, thirsty for rebirth, goes to the burial court, then at the moment when the force is almost over, a great tree appears, and the mother of the tree draws water and bread, drinking water, breaking the bread. The essence of a person gets the strength to reach the burial court, to complete the mission. But after biting and drinking, you will forget the past. You will forget the past life. But you will gain the strength to reach the court of another world. Now, the topic of the mother of sycamore is Kadkor, or sometimes nut. It is incredibly popular in the Egyptian tradition and in everything that is related to immortality. And accordingly, somewhere on the banks of Memphis, there was such a sacred tree. We moved with you from the Kadkor temple a little further to the temple of Ramses the Second. Apparently it was a small temple of the goddess Eshmet. Here's such a swamp. These are excavations of the 1950s. This frame is unique. These were temple excavations with an attempt to preserve phoenix palms. That is, you see, they leave a coma for the soil near the trees. Water is there somewhere on the knee, and among this water were found fragments of a huge sculptural group, which is now in the Museum of the Open Air. In the centre is a beaten figure of a bird. On the right is Eshmet. On the left is Ramses. And the statue is very interesting because on the side of Ramses there is such a very funny signature favourite jewel on the way to the bird. Statue and favourite jewel. What is it? Pilgrimage is the path which leads you from temple to temple. And now let's say you came from Fife to Memphis in order to get to the bird and his wife Eshmet. And then, for example, at some point a small sanctuary appears where the Hathorian model is. Remember, I showed you the likeness of the column, and you have there worship of the goddess Hathor as a merciful mother of gods, then Eshmet as the angry mother of gods. And then there are such statues which are called the jewel. These are statues that were considered healing, and they had their own cult. There are very few of them, and this statue is one of those. Therefore, despite all its damage, it is very valuable. And by the way, note that Ramses had encrusted eyes. He has these empty eye sockets for inserting incrustations there. That is, the statue is inside this sacred landscape. Very, very significant. In the 1940s, archaeologist Alexander Badawi bought several houses in the village and demolished them. And right under these houses, he finds the house of Apis. That is, this is the part of the temple complex where Apis was worshipped. Apis is the Greek name of the Egyptian bull Hapi. This is the sacred bull of the god Ptah. Stela from Louvre. Just the royal sons of Ramses the Great worship Hapi. What was the cult of Apis? Each Egyptian deity, as you remember, had its own sacred animal. It bears the status of Uhim. Uhim is a literal repetition, a particle. Apis was chosen by at least 50 signs, and then it was believed that the breath of Apis is healing. Saliva is healing. Apis gave the oracles, that is, the movement of the bull. Either refusal or acceptance of food were perceived as the will of the gods. Apis was a very popular oracle, and accordingly, in addition to the fact that inside the temple of Ptah on the territory was Apis himself and his mother, who automatically became the sacred cow goddess Isis. When Apis was chosen, sacred animals were also embalmed in this temple. This is completely unique. This is an embalming horse for the bull Apis, 4th century BC. Egyptian travertine, everyone's favourite alabaster. And then, how many houses Badawi bought? So much he cleared the temple of Apis, because further there was already a residential yard, lodge of the 4th century BC. Next to it, believe me, there are other smaller lodges for other sacred animals, for ibises, falcons, birds, and so on. Accordingly, the cult of Apis as a sacred cow Ptah in Memphis played a very big role. Therefore, we will move for a moment to Saqqara, to the Memphis necropolis. This is Serapeum. This is a huge underground complex of sacred bowls. This is the place where, at least starting from the era of Amenhotep III, that is from the 14th century BC, Apis found the last abode. The complex is heavily restored. After 1992, it was affected by an earthquake. Therefore, when you see inside the metal arches which support the ceilings, do not be surprised. Unfortunately, this is a necessity. In general, Serapeum in Memphis is a great find of Augustus Ferdinand Marietta, a French archaeologist who was the founder of the Cairo Museum of Antiquities. And in fact, it all started with a very fun wine party in the gardens adjacent to the mansion of the diplomat Tsitzini. And in the gardens of Tsitzini, when everyone was drinking, Marietta saw beautiful limestone sphinxes of the 4th, 3rd centuries BC, and he was wondering where they came from. And Tsitzini said that he was walking in the desert, and there were these sphinxes lying around, that he had collected several of them, the most sacred. The most sacred sphinxes lie there, and if someone needs them, they are welcome. We must understand that this is the 1850s, when everything is simple and easy. And then Marietta, who was enlightened, remembered how the ancient historians speak of a long alley of sphinxes that led to Serapeum, and he hurried to the place that Tsitzini found, and then the remains of the alley of sphinxes led him to Serapeum. Well, by the way, Marietta takes the most sacred sphinxes to the Louvre. Here's a fragment of the exposition of the Louvre, and this is the dungeon of the great Memphis Serapeum, where the mummies of sacred bulls from the temple of Ptah, Memphis, were transported for burial. In my opinion, this is not the most impressive catacombs of Egypt, because all these metal structures interfere a lot. The catacombs of Tonel Gebel are more impressive in Hermopolis. But still, of course, these giant basalt sarcophagi on the left, a huge number of monuments, alas, were taken to the Louvre. The sacred bull Apis on the right from the 4th century BC is in the Louvre, but all this gives a certain impression of the grandiose cult of sacred bulls. Some of the sacred bulls were revered as particularly significant because miracles were associated with them. What miracles? In most cases we do not know, but there was a famous legendary bull at the funeral of the great who was especially famous for his healing of eye diseases. To such an extent that when the bull died, the body was divided into parts. The meat was removed from the bones, dried up and sent like a shrine to different hospitals in Egypt. From the bones, they collected the likeness of a human mummy, which was incredibly buried. He was engaged in all these funerals of the great healing bull, the same Haimuas, the famous legendary son of Ramses II, which we will talk about today. And this burial, it was comparable to the royal ones, and it was just incredible. So our presenter turns on something. Can you remove the arrow, Sergey, please? What is it? Hooray! Everything. Yes, everything is alive. Thank you. This is the pectoral, which was on the chest of the sacred mummy of Pisa. This is gold, half precious materials, laurel. At the bottom there's a sacred neck and a snake. And the neck is Nechbet, the mother-in-law of Upper Egypt, patroness of the Nile Valley. The snake is, of course, the patroness of the delta. Above them flies the soul of the eternal God. This is the neck with the head of the holy oven, the name of Ramses II in the oval in the cartouche, and the symbol of Jed, the symbol of invulnerability. They complete this likeness of the universe in which prevails the eternal God. This is what was hanging on this mummy. The next thing is even more famous. This is the same thing. This is the pectoral of the soul of the eternal God. I will explain a little what is meant by this. In ancient Egypt, the entity that is close to the concept of the soul sounds like Ba. Oven is determined by the breed. This is also Be Ba. Therefore, when an Egyptian artist wants to depict the unimaginable, namely the soul of the eternal God, which soars in another world and prepares the sun for resurrection, it is depicted in the form of a female neck with the head of the oven. Therefore, here is the neck. Here is the head of the oven. I think it's clearly visible here. I specifically gave this frame in 2 projections. And in her pores, the neck holds Shen, the hieroglyph of infinity. But this is a thing that can only be found on the Tsar's mummy, perhaps. Accordingly, this bill was so famous that these things were put on his mummy. If you're looking for materials on the internet, you should not be surprised that when Marriott found this unique thing, he thought that in front of him was the mummy of Hammos himself, the heir to the son of Ramses II. Then it became clear that the bones are bulls and that they are conditionally composed in this likeness of a human mummy. Well, the further sources that managed to be discovered showed the true history of this object. Naturally, in those years, Marriott worked at the Louvre, so nothing remained in Cairo. All these things, a huge hole of serapeum in the Louvre, if you look, there are absolutely fantastic monuments. Well, such a conditional golden mask made of foil was placed on the face of this conditional mummy, which associated the bull with the divine spirit and with a dazzling light. The so-called conditional mask of Hammos in the Louvre, Paris, Hall of Serapeum. We must understand that all this incredible religious culture that I'm talking about, it was built not only on the deeds of the Tsars, but also on the huge clergy of the bird, the mythical priesthood of the bird. We know a lot about the priests of the bird, more than 200 names for the entire tradition of the existence of the temple, about whom one Staley, about whom a huge biography and history. This is a wonderful portrait. This is one of the statues of Mr. Ronifer, who was the supreme priest of the god of the bird at the turn of the 4th and 5th dynasties. That is, this is the 25th century BC, and there are no other special attributes. But Ronifer's proud in the inscription on the statue that he is a priest of the same bird as Saqqara. He is the keeper of the ritual of overcoming death, and he is also Samruat. He is the closest friend of the only Tsar, Samruat Nesu. So you can translate this title. Initially there were 2 supreme priests. Why there were these 2, we do not know. A later one supreme priest appears, who was, well, he was one of the 5 most important figures in the Egyptian and sacred space and political for many millennia. 2 statues of Ronifer. The face of the second one was just before you, and this is already the ancient kingdom. And to the middle kingdom, very interesting attributes appear. This triad is damaged. It was 3 priests, 3 generations. They were called Nebu, Skitipi Brahmi Jem, and Skitipi Brata Keret. These are the priests of the bird of the 19th at 18th centuries BC. And now we look at their earrings. This is the earring called Sak. This is the main distinctive feature of such priests. From professional publications, the picture changes in some way its form. In general, these are animals that kind of bend around the neck, next to the suspension, next to the face of the goddess, Bat, the goddess of protection. We do not know the symbolism of Sak. It is not described anywhere. This is something very highly sacred, but it is such a necklace on the images that most often distinguishes the high priest of the god of the birds. The second important thing is a specific headdress. This is a Lavian wig, and on the side is a bow of youth. He is like an eternal young man. And the 15th century BC on the right is Stella, which is dedicated to the cult of the whole family of the high priest of the bird. She was made a bird lover. This is the name of this person, and this is a part of the monument. There is Leiden, and on the left is a part of the monument from the tomb of the high priest of the bird, Ptahmes. And here he is, also here in such a peculiar attire with this bow. By the way, like their god, the priests of Ptah and Mephisto wear the title of Ur-Herpuhemut, the head of all arts and crafts. Everything that is related to materialization, this is all to them. Nevertheless, the second title of these priests is Satan. This is the priest of the late colt. That is, they are associated as their god with the borderline, with this border between our world, manifested and unmanifested, and therefore the rituals associated with secret knowledge, with the necropolises, with accumulation of knowledge. They're all there. Probably the most famous priest of the bird in all history is the same Haimuas, which we talked about today, the fourth son of Ramses the Great, and his second wife is Setnefret, a characteristic attire, and on his portrait, here is a portrait from the Berlin Museum, and then one of his main accomplishments. The fact is that he is even sometimes called the first Egyptologist in the history of mankind, because he was interested in the past of his country. Think about it. He lives in the 13th century BC, and for example, the Khufu pyramid is the 26th century BC, 13 centuries, and a position, a personality, and apparently some features of the personality make him a researcher of the past. For example, he hides the tombs, which are destroyed, and takes from there the cult statues of ancestors, distant ancestors, strangers to him, and fills them with the courtyards of the temple of the bird in Memphis so that they live. And then he finds a frame below, the pyramid of King Unas. This is the 24th century BC. In this pyramid, for the first time appears the text of the pyramids, the famous, the oldest religious text in the history of mankind. And shocked by this, Haimuas restores the pyramid. That is, it was destroyed for the second time. And on the southern edge, there are fragments of his inscriptions on top, in which he admires the pyramids of King Unas and talks about how, in the glory of his father, Ramses the Great, he restored this amazing monument. Once, in search of his necropolis, he finds the statue of Prince Kavab. Prince Kavab was the eldest son of Cheops, and he carries the statue to the temple in Memphis, restores it, renews it, and writes the following on it. This is the high priest Daha and priest Em, the son of the royal Haimuas, who looked after the statue of the royal son of Kavab, and who took it out of the garbage in memory of his father, the king of Upper and Lower Egypt, Khufu, and then ordered the priest Em and the son of the royal Haimuas to place it in honour of the number of gods and spirits in the head of the sanctuary of Kav Rosatau. Rosatau is the necropolis of Memphis, for so he loved the ancient times, and the people revered that lived before, with all that is beautiful, what they did excellently millions of times. Yes, it will be in life, prosperity, health, strengthened on earth, where the high priest Apta, priest Sem, and the royal son of Haimuas, after he strengthened their commemorative ceremonies in this temple before being plunged into oblivion like a human being. And in Serapeum, next to this bull buried here, he leaves such a stela, which is sometimes called the will of Haimuas. I will read this short text. The pacified priest Sem, the son of the royal Haimuas, he says, alas, the priest Sem, the high priests, noble in the temple of Apta, and every poet, skillful in knowledge, who will come to this temple, which I erected for the description of the living, who will see what is drawn on these walls of a magnificent stone. Nothing like this has ever been created. The gods, those that are made of gold in the temple, with different precious stones. I established offerings for them daily and festive, more than those that have ever been sacrificed. I appointed him priests, those who praise, and all kinds of servants. I built a great burial ark in front of the temple, and in front of him a great altar sacrificial from the best white limestone, with divine offerings and all kinds of things, beautiful, pure, kind. Remember my name, looking at what has been done to me, and do the same. O Apis Sakar Asiris, the great god, the winner of the Ark of the Covenant. Truly, I am the priest Sem, the son of the royal Haimuas, an amazing person who not only venerated the temples and not only venerated the ancestors, he is Sakharin. The Japanese are now digging. So far only about the preliminary results there is talk. In Japan, by the way, very strong Egyptology. Many are surprised. So Sakharin, in the place where he was seen like this from Mount Vismalt, he built a sanctuary for himself, his mother and his loved ones. There's a memorial temple of the family, completely unparalleled in Egyptian architecture. And this temple has such an outstandingness, once again shows how amazing, simple and unique person we're talking to you now. His image from the Louvre, just from this temple. And here you see he has a fragment of a necklace with a desert wolf, the top necklace of the bird, about the symbolism of which unfortunately we do not know. It is barely visible here. And to nevertheless show the status of the depicted, well, and the Libyan wig, and without, in conjunction with the slogan of youth, again shows whom we are talking about. The tradition of the priests, keepers of wisdom, it was very long in Memphis, by the way. They played a very big role in the Greek Roman times. That is, if the Thebes repelled Alexandria and believed that she was Alexandria from Egypt, in Egypt, then Memphis agreed with Alexandria and the Ptolemaic court many offerings, many edicts issued in honour of the temple of the bird. This is the first millennium before the new era. This is the supreme priest of the bird, Shishonk. His statue on the left in Vienna, his statue on the right in Budapest. He holds in his hands a kneeling naos with the image of Socrates. With the name Shishonk, a very interesting story was found, because in 1942 Alexander Badovit decided to make a channel from the temple of the bird to somehow lower the water level, and then on the territory of the temple, such a yellow saturated circle, it says necropolis of the supreme priest. Tombstones of the supreme priest of the bird were found, and among them are different tombstones of different qualities depending on the era. The tombstone of the supreme priest of Shishonk was found. Here is a fragment of relief. Appreciate what a work. He himself stands here, worshipping the god Anubis. The work was such that the tombstone in the upper part of the tomb was taken and transported to the park of the Cairo Museum. There it stood. No one knew what it was in the backyard. But it is in this tomb I am now showing you this zone. This is the temple of the second prince, to which the tombstones adjoin. And here they are, the tombstones of the supreme priest of the bird, completely non-standard, not in the Saqqara, not in Necropolis, but right next to it, on the territory, on the land of their god. And here, such a facade of the tomb, I specifically show you the drawing, because everything that is green are the blocks of his epoch. These are the reliefs made for him in his time. Everything that is red are the blocks of the epoch of Ramses the Great's successors, that is, they were used. And everything that is blue are the blocks of the epoch of the 18th dynasty of the 14th century BC. And now look, it's not just an usurpation. He takes, for example, the figures of two images of the god of the bird, complements them, he inserts them into the plot. That is, here we are not talking about a stupid usurpation of a monument when there is not enough stone, and he builds from what he got. He builds a tomb, intending to include in it fragments of famous shrines, which combine into one such iconographic program. Here, in fact, are these two birds, and Shishong himself in front of Anubis. You understand that this part is this one. I have already shown you the previous one. It was still an old shooting in the park of the Cairo Museum. It is from this burial, which was not plundered, that two goddesses of Kadkor happen, which probably everyone knows. This is a very favourite image of the goddess. This is a suspension from a lazurite with encrusted eyes, and this is a small golden Kadkor. On the right is a very rare frame of 1942. Just this massif, there were groundwater, the mummy did not survive. This is a massif of flesh, bones, burial pellets, and those objects which lay on the mummy of the Supreme Shishong. Both Kadkor, they're perfectly red. These are completely unique things. Fortunately, despite the fact that this burial was damaged by the waters, these wonderful monuments have been preserved. They are among the masterpieces of the Egyptian Museum in Cairo. And there inside is such a fantastic scene when the god of Ershu raises the goddess of heaven Mut under the feet of the god Geb, the god of the earth. And inside this small tomb, amazing by the quality of the illustration to the most important readings of the Book of the Dead, which accordingly becomes such an ideological axis for the iconographic program of this burial. Well, if in the tomb of Shishong there was such an amazing magic of using more ancient monuments, then in many others everything was easier. And one of such supreme priests just pulled out of the necropolis the sarcophagus of Amenhotep Hui, who was the supreme priest of Ptah during the reign of Joseph II, and just commanded to bury his body there. Just as he threw the body of the predecessor, so he was robbed of the tomb, that is, he was returned. And on the left, in fact, this sarcophagus itself, and on the right, a large frame with a lid. Look at the beauty of the goddess of heaven inside. The flattened wings, and here everything is in prayers in the name of the contemporary of Joseph II. Accordingly, these are prayers for immortality. Not only the temple, not only the tomb. A unique story happened in Memphis in 1916, when one of the archaeologists of the Americans at the University of Pennsylvania began excavations not far from the temple in the area called Kom El Kala. And there was found a real palace from the 13th century to the new era, the palace of Mir Niptah, the son of Ramses II. These are fragments of the excavation, and now I will show you absolutely amazing things. First of all, how did it look? The central entrance area is preserved, the courtyard is open to the sun, then the bedroom hall, and then the reception area. Here you see both a three-dimensional reconstruction and how it would look on the plan. The fantasy of this find was that the palace of Nipta was preserved. Fragments of it were transferred, unfortunately, to the Museum of Pennsylvania. All the elements of polychrome painting are all genuine pigment from the 13th century to the new era. Sphinx from Memphis, these are all Memphis things. In Pennsylvania, they could not find a room that could accommodate columns. And they are columns. They are the same columns, but they are cut in half. They are exposed in parts. Only 2 columns were left in Egypt. They are now in the new Great Museum in Gemi. There are 2 columns there. Now look at the painting. It's fantastic. This is the 13th century BC. And on the left, Nipta himself, as the great king, beats the enemies of Egypt. All this polychromy is incredibly preserved due to the fact that this section of the archaeological zone of Memphis was higher. There was less groundwater. Here's a column for you. This is a fragment of a door opening. And this is how it is chopped, exposed in Pennsylvania. They chop things, sawed them to squeeze them into the museum. On the one hand, it is a unique find. On the other hand, it is a great sadness. In Egypt then, the floor was plated and taken away. The fact is that in the palace of Nipta, the floors were covered with gold and silver plates, which were preserved. And they were found in the 16th century. That is, gold was the king's days, silver was the king's nights. And it was such a road to immortality. And this is the only example of such a preserved monument, which shows in what fantastic luxury the Egyptian kings lived. This is a window frame with images of sphinxes and signs of goodwill through these openings where the sun rays entered inside the palace. And this is a very rare thing. This is a hall for audiences. The blue arrow shows the platform on which the throne stood. Next to it are 2 columns flanking the passage, and this is the elevation itself, which was once used as a royal place. This is what the royal place looked like. That is, everything is covered with reliefs. There are signs depicting subordinates of the people, almost like a relief carpet. There is no such thing anymore. You will not see it anywhere. The platform is now stored in the archaeological complex of Bitricino. I don't know when they'll put it up. Why didn't they put it up in the Great Museum? Because there is nothing like it nearby. But in the open area itself, they put these columns, these bases, as you can see in the reconstruction, how it all looked. Hieroglyphs on the bases of the columns were encrusted with blue faience. That is, of course, the luxury was absolutely incredible. And someday, I really hope, at least as a reconstruction, the Palace of Nipta will appear. Because this is a unique case when we have an idea not of a temple, not of a tomb, but of a residential royal palace within the territory of the Temple of Ptah in Memphis. Another palace, the northern part of Memphis, is the areas of Komtuman and Komeldaf Babi. There is the palace of King Aprius. This is the 6th century BC. And there, in the northern part, there were just the walls of Inbaj, or white walls. Unfortunately, science has degraded to the point that one well-known mission officially published a release that they found the white walls of Memphis in order to receive funding from the relevant department of the Academy of Sciences. Unfortunately, there are no white walls of Memphis. I would only be for it. But there is the palace of King Aprius, where Peter began to dig in his time. And there is the oldest part of the capital that gave it its name. At the turn of the 19th and the beginning of the 20th century, just look at the giant palm-shaped capitals. And in fact, the palace of Aprius is Kom. This is a huge platform, a platform so that the flow of the Nile did not touch the royal palace. And then there was an exclusive palace complex, judging by individual fragments. I will show you such a wonderful fragment of the gate in it, which is kept in the Metropolitan Museum. And here is a reconstruction. You see, the red frame shows the gates from which this relief, that is the platform, the palace itself around the garden. And here is Memphis as a city and the bank of the Nile, which could demolish the palace at the time of the flood. Therefore, here is such a high platform that makes this palace completely unique, and excavations are being carried out there, I repeat, since the beginning of the 20th century. This is the view from the windows of the palace of King Apries in Memphis. There is the pyramid of Djoser of Saqqara. And now think, my friends, once again, this is the idea that will sound today the whole lecture, that living in Memphis, you live inside the history in the literal sense of the word, and you see the first pyramid, the history of the great kings, these giant necropolises. That is in Memphis. The feeling of time is measured by thousands of years. And this is absolutely amazing on the one hand, and on the other hand, this is probably not the beginning of a completely amazing corpus of works, which I will tell you briefly, but it is amazing. It gives the feeling of Memphis through the text. A fragment of papyrus from the British Museum is part of the corpus of Saint Nicola. Saint Nicola is the son of Ramses II, who entered into a later tradition as the royal son, the seeker of the sacred wisdom. This 100th prefix to the name is from the title of Setim, from the priest of the late cult. Two large lists, one in the British Museum, one in the Cairo Museum, and in this story there are 3 blocks. Unfortunately, the text is still not fully translated into Russian. I will tell you small fragments of these 3 blocks, because this is a story about people who live in Memphis. Satni walks around the necropolis of Memphis because he is a scientist, he is a magician, and he is looking for something that would help him understand the mystery of the gods. And among these searches he sees tombs, tombstones, pyramids. At some point he sees an old man, very cloudy, who starts laughing at him. "Why are you laughing at me?" he says. "You are not looking there." I laugh. "Look how you read the inscriptions in which there is no strength. Follow me if you want to know the truth. I will tell you about the place where the scroll is kept, written by God taught, his own hand, in those days when he descended to the earth among other gods. There are 2 sentences in the scroll. Tell me the first one. You will enchant the sky and the earth, the mountains and the waters, and the world beyond the tomb. You will learn the speech of the birds, of those that are in the heavens, the crawling creatures of those that are on the earth. You will see the fish in the depths when the water is raised above them. Tell me the second one. In the house of eternity, you will get the strength to accept the appearance that he had on earth. You will see how the sun makes its way in the heavens around the gods, how the moon disk is born in the height, what stars are the true appearance. Shocked by the words of the old man, Satni asks, "Where? What does it indicate to him? Where is the tomb? Where is this book?" And then turn on your imagination. The scene is beautiful because the king's son comes to the tomb. There is a mummy that squeezes the papyrus. When he tries to pull the papyrus out of the mummy opens his eyes and says that I will not give it to you because I suffered getting this text. And in general, you have no right to it. Then he begins to play senet, this beautiful Egyptian game that looks like chess, and Sat-Nehemat loses, and every time the mummy hits him on the head with a board and he goes to the ground, and at that moment when only the head, he's actually a sorcerer, a magician himself. He calls his brother Enar, who also has some kind of sorcery, and he pulls magic from the earth. And then when he still tries to pull this flower out of the mummy, a ghost of the soul of the wife of this once dead person appears behind the mummy. His name was Naneferkaptah. Her name was Ahura. And Ahura says, "Do not take it. You will return it, spill an ash on your head, because you take it without asking." And then she tells the story of her husband, a very difficult one, who, like this young man, passionate about the search for sacred knowledge, tries to find a book written by the hand of God. And he finds out that in the area of the city of Koptos, this is Upper Egypt, there is a great sanctuary of gods. A boat is made of wax with mushrooms. Wax mushrooms float on water and show where under the water. He reads a spell, the water diverges, and the water flows in a stream both to the right and to the left, and he descends to a dry sandy bottom. There is his battle, because there is a stone layer. In the stone layer is a golden layer. In the golden layer is a silver layer. Inside the silver layer is a layer of meteorite iron, and there's a book written by the hand of God, Totor. All this is kept by an immortal snake. And Naneferkaptah begins to fight with the snake. He cuts off the snake's head. The snake snaps its fingers. The head grows. So twice. The third time, he threw it on the neck of the sand. The head did not grow. He died. He gets the book. He begins to read it and quote it to everyone. Then he does a very important thing for the ancient Egyptians. He writes down the book. He makes a list. He rewrites it. The rewritten book. He dissolves. The text dissolves with the paint in the beer. Then he begins to drink this beer and read the book. The book is assimilated with the soul and mind, and what he drinks is assimilated with the body. And at this moment, he becomes conscious. Suddenly, he sees the boats of the gods, begins to understand everything that happens in the universe, hears the voices of birds, animals, fish, and he goes crazy and rushes to them, because human consciousness is not able to accommodate this. Then the unhappy widow Ahura, together with her son Meribam, they find this body, balsamize it, bury it, and Ahura tells the story to Sat-Nehemat with the words that one has already passed: "Do not do this." And then Sat-Nehemat, a young man looking for sacred knowledge, naturally he takes this book and begins to read it. And he begins to read it on the squares, on the crossroads, to whom it is necessary and to whom it is not necessary. And then the second story happens to him. I chose a special illustration, a famous relief by Mrs. de Pay from the Louvre from the 14th century to the new era. He comes to the temple in Memphis. Everything happens in Memphis, and suddenly he sees a woman of incredible beauty, and he is the king's son, and he sends his servant to her servant with the words that I am the king's son. A beautiful lady in general make an agreement. We will spend time together. To which he turns to him with a furious face and says, I will not be any to you. I am a priestess. 2, 3 times he finally approaches her. Well, my house, you'll find it simply. It is located in the area of Mrs. Bastet in Angtawe. Angtawe is a border area between Memphis and Necropolis. There you will ask, come to me. And then he goes through Memphis, and suddenly he sees what an incredible city. And he says, how do they all live? Not bad. And there is the house of an average person, like the house of a great vizier. And suddenly he sees a certain golden tower which exceeds the size of the temple of the bird of Memphis. And he pushes to the side of some passerby and he says, "What is this?" "And this is the house of Mrs. Tabuba, the great priestess. You are going too." And the man is so stupid that he does not understand that he got into another world, that he got into the world of pagans. And then she accepts him, pours wine, feeds him, and every time he offers her to come to the main event for which he himself came to her house, she says, "Well, I'm a priestess. Sign the will that if I give birth to a child for you, your children from past wives will not have anything to do with our property." He signs, and again recitative, I'm a priestess. And sign that your firstborn will not be the main thing if I give birth to a son for you. He signs, and the third time, "Order to kill your children, then I will be sure." And he, in absolute renunciation of this will, he signs. And the text says that it is heard how under the tower dogs and cats eat the torn bodies of these children. And at that moment, she says, "I agree," he approaches her and falls on her because she is a ritual stove. And he, in horror, wakes up naked, sprinkled with ashes, on some outskirts of Memphis. A chariot stops. On the chariot some spirit, a very grey-bearded man. And he says, "You idiot, what a sacred knowledge. You are the goddess Bastet, the stewardess of Angtao, and her ritual stove took for a woman accessible behaviour." He says, "You don't see anything in this world. You're not ready for anything at all." And then our hero, sprinkling his head with ashes, goes to the necropolis of Memphis, opens the tomb. There sit the monks, hiccuping, and says, "Well, I'm back. Return the papyrus, because it is not in your status and not in your rank." And the third story, it is no less good. I briefly, again, tell very big things. When Haimuas has already had everything, he has a beloved wife and they have a child. And she goes to the temple and performs the ritual of incubation. And the ritual of incubation is the ritual of divine sleep. And in a dream, there is Osiris. It is Osiris, and it is rare. He is not included in the number of those goddesses in Egypt who are often the answer to the prayer. And he tells her, "You go to the house, there will be a smoke staily, squeeze the smoke staily, drink with your husband, you will conceive a child, you will call him Osiris, Osiris's son, and he will have a special fate." And then, of course, they have a child who grows not by day and not by hour, not only physically, but intellectually. And at the age of 7, he argues with the best intellectuals of Memphis. When he is 12 years old, he already knows everything better than the high priest Abta. So the father is delighted, grandfather Ramses II is generally delighted what kind of person grows up in their family. And then at some point they sit on the balcony of the house of the heir in Memphis. Look at the necropolis. You now represent all the locations. You understand how it happens. And then they drag 2 funeral processes. And one is a rich man, and the bulls drag him, and the sarcophagi are gilded, and the azure decorations, everything is just gorgeous. And then they pull the old man wrapped in some kind of dirty rag because he has nothing. And this little boy, who's a divine child, he comes up to his father and says, "I wish you the fate of this person." And they show him to the poor man. He says to him in horror, "You are my own son. How can you afford this at all? I raised you." And the father still does not understand who was born in his family. And then he leads to the necropolis of Memphis, and with a click of a finger, the doors of the tombs begin to open. He leads him by the hand into the world of the deceased, And there he sees the trial of Osiris, the book of the dead of the 2nd century until the new era before you. And there Osiris, when he sees how they brought the soul of this poor man, Osiris rises from the throne, meets this person, and puts on his clothes of light, because it turns out that the old man was some kind of phenomenal righteousness and merit on earth, and the rich man turns out to be very sinful, and the gods are ready to write him a punishment. And to the absolutely stunned Satni Hamuas, the divine child says, "So now, Dad, do you understand what I wished for you?" Then Satni begins to look at this child with completely different eyes, and then trouble happens, because in Africa the wizards committed a terrible black witchcraft. The bed for sleep with the body of the pharaoh flew into Nubia at night. There he was beaten with batons, and the beaten was returned back. And so it happened several times. And then the advice of all the priests, the wise men, with a very clear hint that Egypt is already old and emerging. They can't really do anything about it. They say, what needs to be done? Here comes this child to the highest council, still somehow looks at him. Some kid came here. Adults, uncles, solve serious state problems, and he says, we'll do everything now, we'll wait in the evening. And at night he says terrible spells, something incredible happens. Then suddenly the roof of the royal palace opens, the bed with the body of the Nubian king flies in. Everyone beats him with batons and sends him back to the territory of the current Sudan. And so it all happens, with mutual diplomatic exchange several times, until finally a terrible wizard, the son of Behemoth, who in fact was reborn, and he must destroy Egypt. And it turns out at this moment that this child of Thistle Osiris is actually a famous wizard, Horsen-Ponashia, whom the gods deliberately reborn in such a purposeful reincarnation so that Egypt could be saved. A terrible battle takes place. The African wizard is almost defeated. He is ready to kill. And you see at this moment the floor of the royal palace turns into an eternal swamp. And from there the African behemoth rises, the mother of the black wizard. And she turns to all the people, you have sons, you have mothers, let him go. To which she is asked a question, why did your son come to us? She says it was just 1,000-year curse, that is, for 1,000 years we gave the word not to appear in Egypt. 1,000 years are over. We made sure that in Egypt everything is still fine with you. We are ready to go back. And then they let go of this wizard. They put another curse on him for another 1,000 years. The word of the mother is clear to everyone. Thanks to the mother, he was released. And then, having explained the essence of things, the divine baby, which is actually a reincarnation of Horsen-Ponashia, and then you all remember the clip, Michael Jackson, he crumbles golden sand on the floor of the royal palace. And at the moment when the crumpled pharaoh, Satni Hamuas, and everyone else tries to realize it all, the door opens, the nanny runs in and says that Satni's wife had a child. That is at the moment when the magical child fulfilled his mission. Satni, due to the fact that he behaved himself correctly, he got a real child. These 3 stories, one day I will probably translate it into Russian. This is the world of Memphis. Only the world is not temple, but human, with this absolutely thin line between the gods and wizards, the past and the future, kings and people. The gates and tombs that open if a person you need clings to them with his fingers, and a completely special feeling of time, which it is clear was born in the deep history of this land. And here is a perfect miracle that it all survived. And the second papyrus, which in the British Museum was found in the tomb of the Coptic monk. That is, early Christians read this magnificent masterpiece of demotic literature. Demotics is the last stage of the development of the Egyptian language and Egyptian writing. Let's go back to Memphis. I told you that every year gives an amazing number of the most incredible archaeological discoveries. Do you remember I told you that I was sitting at the inspector's office when they flew in and said they found Zuleika? Here she is, Zuleika. This is Mertamun, the daughter of Ramses the Great. This is not yet a published statue. Despite all the damage, a fantastic body sawn into stone in thin plastered linen, a huge headdress. Her face is well preserved. You see a unique photo now, because here is the platform on which she will be collected. She will leave after the restoration to the Great Museum in Giza. Then the question arises that we, of course, cannot imagine what else lies under these houses. 2019, a man said that he was digging in the basement of his house in Komlarbia, right on the territory of the temple of the Memphis bird, and he spoke because he was trying to find engineers for help and some other hands, because when people made a dig in the house, this is what is called the Burka of Memphis, and dragged their water and clay, and several people died there at that moment when they tried to pull out the statue of Carancesto II from under the house. This is a statue of the life force of Carancesto II, granite. Only the upper part was found, because after several people sucked in the swamp, the workers refused to climb there and lift the second part of the statue. It's just that this place is now marked. The owner of the house received 15 years of Egyptian prison because this is an illegal excavation. And what you see now in the process of excavation is how it stands in the Archaeological Museum of Fergana. And the label does not say that the statue received its own last victim in 2019. There are many such stories in Memphis. I will give only one as an example. It is clear that poor people, when they understand that treasures are hidden under their houses, they do not think, of course, not about preserving cultural heritage. They even think about their lives and sometimes stay there. I do not want to end on this story. On the one hand, I told you a lot about temples, tombs, palaces. A lot of work is being done on the excavation of houses in Memphis. This is an American frame. And here is a house, several rooms. There is a niche for the cult, where the cult of the home of the holy ancestors was sent. There is one room which is painted, apparently the master's room. And here is the street, and here it is written, you see, the cemetery. That is the cemetery of the living and the world of the departed. It is divided into Memphis by this absolutely thin border and a small street about which the text that I quoted you speak. And then, when you walk in Memphis in the evening, it is a sunset without sin. There are such incredible plantations of phoenix in the palm every time you step on the ground. You do not even imagine what is at this moment under your feet.